Eminent speaker, Mr. Ravi Venkatesan. Mr. Ravi is a UNICEF special representative for young people and also the founder of Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship, a multi-stakeholder coalition which aims to create 10 million entrepreneurs in India and Africa by 2030. He is a trustee of Rockefeller Foundation and a partner at Impact Investor Unitas Ventures. He has served as a chairman of Bank of Baroda, Microsoft India and Cummins India, and board member and co-chairman of Infosys India Limited. He also served on the boards of AB Volvo, Thermax and Harvard Business School, and he was instrumental in creating Microsoft India's Project Shiksha. He has a BTech degree from IIT Bombay and an MBA from Harvard Business School. He is an author of an acclaimed book, Conquering the Chaos, Win in India and Win Everywhere, published by Harvard Business Review, and he was voted as one of the India's best management thinkers by Thinkers 50. With this introduction, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senthil, for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a delight to be back at the Academy. I was last here in 2016 when I was with Bank of Baroda, and they asked me to talk about banking reform, a topic that remains evergreen in our country. And it's also a delight to meet so many fantastic rising stars of our government. I've been asked to talk about youth, jobs, and entrepreneurship. And this is a vast area with a lot of complexity. So what I'm going to do is try and run it like a lecture for about 45 minutes, open it up for some questions, and then I'm going to try and experiment as a little group exercise, because I'm as keen to get your input and insight into our work as I am to share some ideas. So as Senthil said, I spent 30 years in the private sector with all those companies. And last year, I made a huge shift. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres appointed me as the special representative for youth. Essentially, it's not just India that is having a giant problem creating jobs for our young people. This is a problem that virtually every country is facing. And so he said, we need to create a global mission. This now is called Generation Unlimited. And the objective of Generation Unlimited is to help young people, which the UN defines as 18 to 24, globally help make the transition to productive work of different sorts, as well as for active citizenship. Incidentally, India was the second country in the world we launched Generation Unlimited on November 1st. Here we call it UWA. So the question is, why is it that suddenly the whole world is having a challenge around employment and jobs? The reason is simple. It is because we are at a point in time where a number of powerful trends are coming together in a really bad way. So you already know about a few of them. This morning, Foreign Secretary talked about India is trying to grow in a shrinking global economy at a time when the global growth is becoming sluggish. There is a giant trade rift and breakdown of the global system, particularly between China and the US, which has consequences for everyone. So that's one big thing. The more important one is technology. As all of you know, we are in the early stages of what people are calling the fourth industrial revolution. And the fourth industrial revolution is basically huge advances in many fields at the same time. In genomics, where you can now edit genes like software, in computer science, in materials, and of course this is enabling many fantastic things that we are reading about. It's more like science fiction. But one of the things that it's doing is causing a rapid convergence between the capability of machines and us human beings, particularly when it comes to reasoning. So this has enormous consequences for productivity. So I want to give you a simple example of this. Infosys, the company where I was associated for a long time, has revenues of 12 billion. And the company is doing well. It's growing 8 to 10%, which means it's adding 1 billion in new revenue every year. Now the revenue productivity or revenue per employee there is about $55,000. Each employee makes that much. Which means if the company is growing $1 billion, you should be adding somewhere between 17,000, 18,000 jobs every year. In fact, if you look at employment at Infosys, it's pretty flat. And that's because productivity is growing as fast as revenues. So what's happening is a whole IT industry today, it's hiring lots of freshers from colleges. They have good skills in new areas like machine learning and data science. And quietly, the screws are being turned on performance of older people who don't have those skills, who are not able to, produce as much value. So net result is what is called jobless growth. So this is happening in the IT industry, this is happening in banking, for instance, private sector banks like HDFC. They're growing their book pretty fast, 20%, 24%, but employment is static. And so, and this is only going to accelerate. One of the things we looked at in Infosys is how much of the software development can be completely automated with the tools and technology we have today. And that turns out to be about 50%. So we are just at the front end of automation. And of course, what we are seeing next is automation come into every sphere, with the driverless car, with drones delivering packages instead of people on motorcycles. Last week I was in New York briefly, and I walked into a new Amazon store where there is not a single employee. You walk in there and you take whatever you want and put it in your bag, and cameras are watching and they know what you shop for and they debit your account. So all this is not happening, not because the technology doesn't exist, it's because the regulation is not yet allowing it. But that's just a matter of time. So the implication of this is what? That medium and large companies will not be creating jobs anywhere in the world. Don't expect them to. This is not the fault of government, this is not the fault of private sector, this is deeply structural. So that's kind of trend number 2. Trend number 3 is this. There is an enormous amount of disruption going on in the business world. So you see that every week another company is in trouble, not just in India, but everywhere in the world. So we just read about Z Media. Before that it was ILFS, Diwan Housing, Jet Airways, and not all of them are frauds. Many of them are genuine business challenges. Globally, Deutsche Bank, General Electric, they're all in difficulty. So what is happening is, under all these pressures, companies are restructuring their labor contracts. If you see, more and more companies have a very small permanent workforce, and they're increasingly using outsourcing, contract workers, gig economy workers who are able to work from remote locations, etc. Which means what? Fewer and fewer jobs. Another trend that's happening is what is called the half-life of knowledge, particularly in fields where there is a lot of innovation. The half-life of knowledge is dropping now to less than 5 years. In some engineering disciplines like programming languages, it's now 18 to 24 months. So what this means is, in the old days, we pretty much stopped learning formally when we left college. Now, you have to unlearn and learn constantly, lifelong, or you're going to be obsolete. And what happens is companies then tend to prefer younger workers who have the more contemporary skills. So systematically what you're seeing is an age bias, where once you cross 40, 45, at least in the private sector, you're beginning to live on borrowed time because you're not able to reinvent yourselves. And this is happening at a time when people are living longer. There is a fantastic book for those of you who like to read. It's called The 100-Year Life by a professor called Linda Grattan. How many of you have a relative, parent, or close relative who's already crossing 90? Quite a few, okay? And this is going to become more and more common because people are living longer. The chances are most of you will live well past 90. Now, this is generally good news, but it has 2 quite difficult consequences which we don't think about. If you're going to live to be nearly 100, one of the things is you can't financially afford to retire at 60. Very few people are going to have pensions or savings that allow you to retire at 60 and enjoy the next 35 years. Most will have to work till you're 80, 85. Number 2, you're probably going to be bored silly if you retire at 60 and you have to sit around taking vacations for the next 40 years. You can't play with your grandkids because even they will be 50. So you have to do something, okay? So most people will want to work productively, except as I said, companies don't want to hire people who are even 45, 50. Why would they hire people who are 60, 70, and 80? Yes, there's an observation.
What was the book that you said? 100 years?
It's called The 100-Year Life, Linda Grattan. So we have a huge challenge, not just employment for younger people, employment for older people. So these are some of the issues. The thing I want you to remember when it comes to thinking about jobs is, forget about jobs as we have known it. Those are going away, okay? More and more people will have to think about life, professional life, as freelancers, self-employed, if not as entrepreneurs. The career used to be you get into a tunnel and emerge 37 years later. That's still what the IAS is all about. Maybe it's 40 years. In the private sector, you had to navigate 2 tunnels, maybe 3. That is over. More and more, career means you have to navigate a maze, which is full of unexpected adventures. What this means is, we have to think very differently about both education and skilling. Everything we're thinking about today in terms of education and skilling is obsolete from the industrial era. I circulated an article, some of you may have read it last night, I'm not sure. But education was a lot about literacy, numeracy, and then mugging up facts. And that made sense when access to knowledge was difficult. Today, any kid with a cell phone can access all the world's information. So we have to think differently. Skilling is about what? You give people vocational skills that enable them to get placed in jobs in the private sector. But as I said, jobs themselves are getting redefined and going away. So the skills that are important today are less about coding or carpentry or these kinds of vocational skills. The real skill that matters is learning agility, the ability to constantly learn new things, the ability in a situation which you've never encountered before, how do you adapt and survive and flourish? The other skill that is hugely important is what the World Economic Forum calls 21st century skills, which some of you call soft skills. Communication, how do you work with others in teams, decision making, problem solving, how do you find information? These are the exact things that make us human at a time when machines are becoming more powerful. Okay, we have to become more human. Unfortunately, our education system and training programs do very little to teach these things. More than skill set, mindset is very important. Okay? In fact, there is a fantastic work by a psychologist called Carol Dweck. You should read this book as well. It's called The Growth Mindset. And she points out how most people have a fixed mindset. And that if more and more for success, you need what she calls a growth mindset. And that is something that has to be developed. It's not something we are born with. And this determines to the greatest extent how successful you are and how happy you are. Another huge important mindset change is we have to learn to be more entrepreneurial. It doesn't matter whether you're working in government, in private sector, or what. Because what does an entrepreneur do? An entrepreneur knows how to see opportunity. An entrepreneur takes risks. An entrepreneur knows how to mobilize resources. There is great tenacity, so you don't give up when you fail. These are all the qualities that every one of us needs. So whether or not you're going to be an entrepreneur, you need an entrepreneurial mindset. So these are some of the things we are pushing through in Generation Unlimited. And one of the central ideas is, in India and in other countries, we need to see much more entrepreneurship. And that to a very different idea of entrepreneurship called mass entrepreneurship. Now, much of my thinking has been influenced by a Nobel Prize winner called Ned Phelps. Ned wrote this amazing book called Mass Flourishing, book number 3, Mass Flourishing. And in this book, he explores why did some countries like Britain and America become suddenly more prosperous. If you look at Britain in 16th century or 17th century, it was a third-rate power. Its other European countries like Italy, France, Spain were way ahead. And yet something happens in the 18th century and they become the dominant power. By the 19th century, that mantle of leadership begins to shift to the US. And Ned looks at why does that happen? And in particular, he comes to the conclusion that there is this quality in a society or an economy which he calls dynamism. And dynamism is this, that can an ordinary person with no great formal education, no great resources, can they express themselves? Can they invent, build, tinker, or will society put curbs on that? And he says in 18th century Britain and 19th and 20th century America, somehow they created conditions where ordinary people could do extraordinary things. This is really interesting. Now, when you look at the great inventions of the first industrial revolution, which was what? Steam engine, James Watt. Remember that from your third standard, right? Locomotive, George Stephenson. The automatic spinning loom, Richard Arkwright. The process for making wrought iron. Who invented these? These were not elite people who went to Cambridge and Oxford. They were illiterate tinkerers who came up with these things. Again, you move to 19th, 20th century America. There's some elite like Bill Gates. But most of the great inventions were by who? Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, never went to college, Isaac Singer, Thomas Edison, okay? People from ordinary backgrounds. So what Phelps is saying is, if you can create an environment where millions of ordinary people can do this kind of jugaad, tinkering, invention, little businesses, some of them will become really important. Remember that in the 18th century, Napoleon laughed at Britain. He says it is a nation of shopkeepers. But that is exactly what it was. Everybody was busy inventing, tinkering, or exploring in India, and some of them became very successful. So the question is, what do we do with this idea? The person who was most influenced by this was Premier Li Keqiang of China. In 2014, he says to China, look, our export-driven growth is coming to an end, okay? We have to look for markets and opportunities within our own country. And he read this book by Ned Phelps, and he starts a ministry for mass entrepreneurship. Now, there's a website which you can go to. Now, according to them, since 2014, the rate of new enterprise formation in China has been 14,000 per day, and that has now accelerated to 18,000 per day. This is astonishing. Now, when I put this up, people say, "Arey, ye nahi ho sakta hai, they must be lying like typical Chinese statistics." You put some discount factor, it is still way better than our country, okay? And according to Li Keqiang, this is creating tens of millions of jobs, particularly in urban areas. So my point was, last year when I started on all this, I said, how do we replicate this kind of thing in India, where we cannot be top down? How can we create a grassroots thing? That's the thing I want to talk about today. So, now let's switch to India. Now, look, it's a politically sensitive and unpalatable subject, but we have a full-blown crisis when it comes to jobs. Okay, you just have to look around wherever you live, there is a jobs issue. And the arithmetic is simple. You have 1 million a month coming into the workforce population. The formal economy has not created jobs for some time, and it won't. And so what? That means you're going to have growing unemployment or underemployment. And the groups that are most affected are three. First is women, where you've seen that the women's workforce participation has collapsed. Number two is young people. The shocking thing is people below the age of 30 are 10 times as likely to be unemployed as people above 30. Number three is people with higher education degrees. If you have a graduate degree in our country, like engineering, you're 6 times as likely to be unemployed as somebody who has no education, which says two things. The jobs that we are creating are really low-end jobs like food delivery or driving a taxi. So it's not aspirational. And number two, the degrees we are granting are also not worth much, so they're not employable. So we have a big crisis. The other big crisis we have is this. This is not easy to read, but this is a slide that I use a lot with business audiences and particularly outside India. We like to talk of ourselves as a 2.5 trillion economy which is marching to our destiny of 5 trillion. What it conceals is huge inequality. And the way I explain to most people is, India is actually 25 million people who are really rich. That's the size of Australia. Then you have about 300 million people who are middle class, household income is $8,000. That's like Philippines, 3 Philippines. And then you have nearly 1 billion people whose household income is $1,600 a day. That is like sub-Saharan Africa. Okay? It is extremely important to remember that we are these 3 segments. Sorry?
Yes.
Per annum household income. Okay? Now, I don't want to argue on the statistics, but they're broadly right. Okay? And here's the interesting thing. The income growth of the bottom segment is 1% a year, which means that is not, the pyramid is not changing, it is frozen. We will not progress. We can hit 5 trillion without changing the shape of this. That's not progress. The progress is how do you lift that bottom segment up, for which we need extraordinary breakthrough in new business formation. Okay? It cannot happen any other way. So, this brings me to the crux of my presentation. India needs a new engine or multiple new engines of job creation. The last big engines of job creation were when the IT industry started, that employed a lot of people. Coincident with that was the boom in our automotive industry and pharmaceutical industry. Now for some time we haven't had a major new growth engine. So we need multiple engines at our size. So of course construction and infrastructure is hugely important. Make in India is hugely important. But the third hugely important lever is entrepreneurship. We need to see much greater rate of formation and growth of small enterprises. I will repeatedly say we need to focus on small and medium enterprises, not the big ones. Here's a very interesting statistic. If you look at India, we have what is called the missing middle. That means we have huge numbers of self-employed people, and we have a reasonably good number of large companies like the Tata Group or Reliance or Adani and so on and so forth. We have very few small enterprises that are growing to become medium ones. So if you look at this, it shows how many are self-employed, how many have 2 to 3 employees, and then after that it just falls off, okay? And therefore you also see, when you look at the percentage of non-agricultural workforce that is working in SMEs, it is amongst the lowest in the world. It's lower than Bangladesh, lower than Nigeria, forget about US and China. So this, you can say as a crisis, it's also an opportunity. It is a giant opportunity. If we can create many more small enterprises and they start growing to become medium-sized enterprises, that's where the job creation is going to happen. That's a lot of what I focus on. Now, when I talk about entrepreneurship, last night I was talking to Senthil. Hey, what do you want to hear from me? He says startups. That's our immediate reaction. When we talk entrepreneurship, we think about 2 things. We think about the tech-enabled startups of Gurgaon, Bangalore, Mumbai, Ola, Swiggy, Uber, whatever, all these kinds of companies. Or we think about the valiant, self-employed pakoda wala who's doing well. Neither creates jobs. The big startups are very important for the economy, for wealth creation. But if you actually look at the core number of employees at Ola or Oyo or whatever, it's very small. They are creating extremely low wage employment, typically around 10,000 rupees for delivery and so forth. They don't create jobs, not anywhere in the world. The other one is self-employment. Don't confuse this with entrepreneurship. This is what we call necessity entrepreneurs. He is doing or she is doing what she's doing to stay alive. What we want are opportunity-seeking entrepreneurs. Very different type of thinking. So that's why we say what India needs, what the world needs, is what I call mass entrepreneurs, which are people who are creating ordinary businesses, kirana shop, beauty salon, barber shop, motorcycle repair, restaurant, food delivery business. These kinds of businesses all over the country, not just in the urban areas. And they should employ 5 or more people and be growing. Okay, so this is our definition of what we really need. I'm going to show a quick video of a classic mass entrepreneur.
ಈಗ ವೆರೈಟಿ ಟೀ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ವೆರೈಟಿ ಟೀ ಮಾಡೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಸುಮಾರು ಜನ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಗಡಿಗೆ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ. ಈ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಇದು ವೆರೈಟಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಯ್ತು ನಮ್ಗೆ. 2:45ಗೆ ಬೆಳಿಗ್ಗೆ ಫುಲ್ ಡೇ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ. ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಮಲಗಿದ್ರೆ 12:45 ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ 2:45ಗೆ ಎದ್ದೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಒಂದು ಅಂಗಲ್ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಫುಲ್ ಡೇ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ನಿದ್ದೆನೇ ಇರಲ್ಲ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ ಕೂಡ. ನಾನು ನಮ್ಮ ಬೈಕು ನಮ್ಮ ತಮ್ಮ ನಾವೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀವಿ. ಲೆಮನ್ ಟೀ ಕುಡಿ, ಜಿಂಜರ್ ಟೀ ಕುಡಿ, ಮಸಾಲಾ ಟೀ ಕುಡಿ. ಅವಾಗ ನಮ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ಆಯ್ತು. ಏನಪ್ಪ ವೆರೈಟಿ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ ನೋಡ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಂದು ಆ ವೆರೈಟಿ ಅಂತ ಎಲ್ಲ ತುಂಬಾ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಜನ ಬರೋದು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಖುಷಿ ಆಯ್ತು. ನಾವು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟರು ಕೂಡ ಇವ್ರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಒಂದು ವೆರೈಟಿ ಇಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಉಳ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಟೀ ಕುಡಿಕಂತ. ಆ ಹುಡುಗರೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದ್ಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಈಸಿ ಆಯ್ತು. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಲೇಬರ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಅವಾಗ ಸಡನ್ ಆಗಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಬಿಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಆ ಟೈಮ್ ನಾವೇ ಉಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೆಲಸ ಯಾವ ಹಿಂದೆ ಮುಂದೆ ನೋಡಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದನೇ ಬಂದಿದ್ವಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾವು ಹೋಗಿ ಮಾಡೋದೇನಿದೆ ಅದರಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ನಾವು ಎಷ್ಟು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟು ಅಷ್ಟು ಫಲ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ಎಷ್ಟು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟು ಅಷ್ಟು ಹೆಸರು ಬರುತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ. ನಾವು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟು ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಈಸಿಯಾಗಿ ಯಾವುದು ಸಿಗಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಮನಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಇದಿತ್ತು. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ನಾವೇ ಅಷ್ಟು ಕೂಡ ಆದರೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟು ಅಷ್ಟು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಒಂದು ಹೆಸರು ಬಂತು ನಮಗೆ. ಶಾಲೆ ಟೀ ಅಂದರೆ ವೆರೈಟಿ ಟೀ ಅಂದರೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಶಾಲೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಹೆಸರು ಬರ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ಒಂದು ತುಂಬಾ ಖುಷಿ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟು
This is the really important.
ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. 1 ಲಕ್ಷ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಕೂಡ 40 ಲಕ್ಷ ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ರಾಫಿಟ್ ಇದೆ. ಈಗ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ನನ್ನ ಒಬ್ಬರಿಂದ ಸುಮಾರು ನಮ್ಮ ಇಡೀ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿನೇ ಬದುಕ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಅದೊಂದಿಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬರಿಂದನೇ ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ 20 ಜನ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಇಷ್ಟು ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಕಷ್ಟ ಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಆಶೀರ್ವಾದವಾಗಿರ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಡ್ಯಾನಿಯಲ್ ರವರು ಸಿಗರೇಟು ಮಾರಾಟ ಮಾಡುವುದನ್ನು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಲು ದಿಟ್ಟ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆಯನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಟರು. ಅವರು ಹಗಲು ರಾತ್ರಿ ಶ್ರಮಿಸಿ ತಮ್ಮ ವ್ಯವಹಾರವನ್ನು ತಲುಪುವ ಗಾಡಿಯಿಂದ 5 ವಿಸ್ತಾರವಾದ ಶಾಖೆಗಳನ್ನು ಪ್ರಮುಖ ಸ್ಥಳಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಿರ್ಮಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
So the point is this: he is not the self-employed variety. He has grown, and now he's employing many more people, and that's what we want to see. Okay, so when we look at these kinds of enterprises, there are a number of things we learn that's very different. First is, these businesses start out organized. Most businesses which are in the informal sector remain dwarfs. If you want to grow, you start out organized. You incorporate your business, you pay taxes, you have a bank account, you're conducting transactions, and that the transaction history allows a bank to then lend to you, so you get credit. All these things are very important. The second thing is, usually the entrepreneur has some education, may not be highly educated, but some education. Because to grow a business, you need to start thinking about marketing, you need to think about brand, you need to think about how to use technology like WhatsApp and other things, accounts, finance. It is makes a huge difference when the entrepreneur is actually starting out that way. And we found that most of these businesses flourish when the local environment in that district, in that city, has 3 conditions: reasonable infrastructure, reasonable education, and the ease of doing business is again reasonable. Now, I want to point out something. We've done a lot of work this last year in trying to understand, why don't we see more entrepreneurship in our country? Because it is ferociously difficult to start and run a business. Okay, it is exceptionally hard. Now, what are the challenges? First of all is the fear of failure. The risk of failure is very high in our country, because not only is it financial, there's also social stigma. Only in Bangalore and Gurgaon now is there no shame in failing. In much of the country, in fact, there's pride if you tried a startup and it failed. Okay, that means you actually learned something. But much of the country, there's social stigma. The second big issue is ease of doing business. Now people say, man, India's made so much progress on ease of doing business. That is true for large companies, and that too major cities like Mumbai and Delhi. On the ground, the ease of doing business in most of our country is horrific, okay? So we work with the Center for Civil Society. They've just completed a really good report, which is accessible on our website, looking at what does it take to set up a food stall or a hawker business in Delhi. And it turns out to be unimaginably hard. 120 to 150 days to get all the licenses. Anywhere from 18,000 rupees to 1.8 lakhs, depending on how many bribes you have to pay. Shifting regulatory environment, lots of inspections, and so on and so forth. And access to finance is usually very, very difficult, okay? So overall, it turns out to be very hard. So if we can't change this back to Ned Phelps and mass flourishing, you can have the greatest entrepreneurial talent, but the soil and climate is not fertile. That's a lot of what we have to do to change things, okay? So, where am I going? Okay, then we looked at one more thing. Look, entrepreneurship is not a new idea. For 40 years, people have been trying things. 40 years ago, government set up the bank set up the Entrepreneurship Development Institute in Ahmedabad. We've had many schemes, yojanas to promote entrepreneurship. Yet, we have not yet broken through. Why? Because if we're going to do something different, we have to learn from what has come before us. Three major reasons. Number one is, when we think entrepreneurship, we still think about urban startups disproportionately. What we need to think about is this kind of business everywhere. Number two, each intervention, each yojana, each scheme is working on a narrow part of the problem. So you'll have Mudra. Mudra doesn't look at what is the capability of the entrepreneur, okay? Or you'll have RCETIs, which is focused on the skilling part. Or you will have somebody who's doing good work in education, or somebody else will set up incubators. That doesn't work. Unless all the pieces come together at the local level, you don't get success. And finally, too much of our efforts are focused on the supply side of entrepreneurship. Find a person who's got an idea, give him some support, give her some mentoring, give her some small loan, seed capital. That doesn't work. You have to start, no business succeeds unless it is connected to a customer, market, demand. So if we're going to succeed, we have to start from the demand side, then all the other things fall into place. So this is what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do now is to create a collaborative movement between businesses, government, entrepreneurship development organizations, technology companies, banks, to really create this entrepreneurial movement in our country. We call this GAME, Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. I'm the founder. And here's the thing, we're trying to see in the next decade, how do we create 10 million such businesses, 1 crore such businesses? At least half of them should be women-owned. Today that number is 4%. And on average, they should create 5 or more jobs, creating 50 million new jobs by 2030. This is the goal of this mission. It's a Section 8 company, not-for-profit, well-funded, and it's this coalition. The way we're doing it is through these 5 interventions. First, make entrepreneurship aspirational for young people in particular. Go into schools and give them the entrepreneurship mindset and skill set. How do you help the first-time entrepreneur who has an idea but doesn't know how to go about it? What interventions will help these small businesses grow? And then finally, specific interventions aimed at supporting women entrepreneurs. I'm going to talk now very quickly about some of these things. Let's start with aspiration. Every survey that I have seen shows that the young in India aspire to a government job. That's the #1 aspiration. You can see that in the IAS itself, right? And that's because it's safe and has good benefits and pay, and there isn't much accountability, okay, unlike the private sector. Now, there are regional differences. In Gujarat, entrepreneurship is still important, dhanda. In Karnataka, the young aspire to a Bangalore tech job. In Kerala, it's Gulf and banking, whatever. There's some regional difference, but overall, very few aspire to start a business. Why? Because of that fear of failure and because of the difficulty and challenges of doing this. So we said we have to change the mindset. We're doing 2 things here, testing 2 things. Everything we're doing is testing stage. #1, we're trying to use social media. So we have a huge partnership with Facebook to use WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook to create local campaigns of successes. If you think about the IT revolution, how did it happen? First, it started with just 2-3 companies. TCS, Infosys, they became successful. People saw that, they started more companies. Others decided to learn technology skills and became employees. And then it starts with role models of success. So that's what we're trying to show. Person in this district, just like you, look how much what they are doing. If they can do it, why not me? The second thing is more interesting. We're in the early stages of working with UNICEF and Punjab government. Who's from Punjab? Okay, so Punjab is just fantastic because with Vinny Mahajan, the Chief Minister's support, we're trying to launch a youth engagement program in the first quarter. We want to engage at least 1 million youth as problem solvers and change makers. So what we're trying to do is get youth organizations, and that includes NSS, Ashoka, Prava, such people, who know how to mobilize young people and handhold them. We're giving them designing challenges for them to solve. The challenges can be anything they care about in their local area: water, sanitation, plastic, whatever. And we're getting them to think about, with this, as I solve this problem, is there a business opportunity? Earlier this year, I met a very small team from Kashmir. And they came to see me saying, you're doing all this, can you support us? They were taking plastic waste bottles and all off Dal Lake. And they had bought a small 3D printer. And they were trying to print useful things and sell it. It's not going to be a huge business. But that thinking is what we want. Okay, so what we're trying to see is in 2020, can we mobilize 1 million people and put them through this? So it's not just about titillation through videos, but actually try to launch a business. The second thing we're doing is going into schools. Now my co-founder in this is a guy called Mekin Maheshwari. He was the first employee at Flipkart, which is like winning a lottery. So by 35, he became very rich. And in 2016, he decided to start Udyam Learning Foundation. And they started working with Bangalore government schools, saying, can we teach young people how to launch a business? So after some classroom training, etc., they get 1,000 rupees each. And they are supposed in the 3 summer months to launch a business and give back at the end the 1,000 rupees. 92% of the teams made a profit, which was shocking. So last year in 2018, Manish Sisodia heard about this and he said, Mekin, come to Delhi and work with Delhi government schools and launch this program there. From July 1 this year, 7.5 lakh children in 1,024 Delhi government schools from class 9 to 12, their first subject, compulsory subject, is entrepreneurship. Okay? And they also will get 1,000 rupees before the summer and they will have to launch their business and get it back. Now, of course, Delhi is going into election. We'll see whether this experiment lasts or not. And we are hoping to take this to other places, other states. So we have an MOU with Punjab government to begin to pilot this in Punjab. That's why all the education secretaries out here, I'd love to have lunch with you and see, is there interest in bringing this to your states? I want to very quickly run the video. थोड़ा volume बढ़ा दो जी.
It is the need of the hour.
जब कॉलेज से बाहर निकले,
This is Delhi school.
मुझे एक माइंडसेट लेके निकले कि मुझे कुछ अलग करना है.
कि वो अब फर्स्ट टाइम अपॉर्चुनिटी मिली है, वैसे पहले मिलती थी नेचुरल फूड में, अब तक वो इम्प्रूवमेंट आता है.
बहुत सारी different activities करते हैं. Cause of mindfulness, relax feel होता है और
3-4 घंटे लगातार पढ़ने में सक्षम हो पाया हूँ.
इससे हमारा कंसंट्रेशन पावर जो है वो बहुत इंक्रीज हो चुका है. एक दूसरे को ज़्यादा जान पाए और उनके साथ ज़्यादा इंटरेक्ट हो पाए.
तो बच्चों में एक क्यूरियोसिटी निकली कि ये हमारे में एक गुण है क्या, और वो उस गुण को उन्होंने पहचाना. ये सबसे बड़ी बात मुझे लगी कि एक बर्तन से रिलेट करके उन्होंने अपनी मन की बात कही.
मैं सबसे पहले कढ़ाई पे आपको इसमें बहुत सारे डिलीशियस खाने बनते हैं, मुझे कढ़ाई पे मैं सबसे पहले कटोरी को याद करूँगी.
Look, I can go on, but the point is they've come alive. The point is not that they're all going to become entrepreneurs. Less than 5% will try, many will not succeed. But they have come alive, their mind is open, they're curious, they're now thinking entrepreneurially. So that's why we call this entrepreneurship mindset. Everybody should have an entrepreneurial mindset. The next thing I want to talk about is this project around women entrepreneurs. Look, as I said, 4% of women businesses with more than 3 employees are women-owned. We want to get to 50%. There's a huge gap. So we said, look, where are the opportunities for women? It turns out women do well when they can start a business from the home and when there is flexibility of hours, so particularly in the afternoon hours when the kids are in school, before people come home, they can run them. So we found 2 opportunities which are huge. One is around food, one is around creches. And between them, there's 900,000 to 1 million businesses that can be started according to work that McKinsey did. So we said, look here, Bangalore mein karte hain, because Bangalore has this huge single population, lots of working professionals. They're busy, they have money, and they're all eating junk food from restaurants, which is an environmental disaster, expensive. So why not eat healthy home-cooked meals? So we're trying to create 2,000, 3,000 women entrepreneurs this year in Bangalore. And if we can do that, we said, look, we can take the model to another 100 cities. So we said, look, let's bring these women together. We also brought in food platforms like Swiggy, Foodie Buddy, WhatsApp, all these people, banks, Bank of Baroda, Bandhan Bank to lend. And we said, what help do these women need? Number one is affirmation. Many women have enormous skills when it comes to cooking, but they don't have the confidence that they can build a business. So we are organizing them into groups and communities so they can affirm each other, learn from each other, support each other. And that's done both through WhatsApp groups as well as physical groups. Number 2, they need help finding customers. That's where tech platforms like Swiggy become really important. Number 3, they need business skills. Many of them have never thought about, menu banana hai, what should I think, how should I think about pricing, all these things. 4th, access to finance. The moment she starts succeeding, you outgrow the kitchen. Now you have to start buying equipment. Soon, if you're successful, you have to move to what's called a cloud kitchen, which is a shared infrastructure. So what we're trying to do is make interventions in all this, and we hope to take this to at least 100 cities in the next 4-5 years. Next experiment. This is quite fantastic. This is work in Meghalaya. Is anybody from Meghalaya here? Not one? Oh, okay. Well, it turns out Meghalaya is not only a nice compact state of 2.5 million, they've had a lot of interest in promoting entrepreneurship for quite some time, and they've had these entrepreneur facilitation centers, etc. But there's been no real breakthrough. So they asked us to come in and get into a formal partnership, which we have. And we're focusing on 3 major areas. One is eri silk. It turns out they produce some of the best silk, and this is ahimsic silk, which the world would die for if only they knew it existed. But there's no branding, the designs are not contemporary, etc. The second is around turmeric, which is, as you know, if you go to a Starbucks anywhere, now they have turmeric lattes, and they're drinking more turmeric, they call it turmeric lattes than regular lattes. And our curcumin content in Meghalaya is the highest in the world. And then the third is around ecotourism. So we're focused right now, launching on 16, the Eri Silk project. And again, we bring together all the actors. So we brought in Raymond. I'm the chairman of Raymond. You forgot to mention that, Senthil. So we did fantastic work in the last 2 years on Raymond Khadi. If you go to a Raymond shop now, you will find amazing line of Khadi creations, both men and women. And it's not priced at 500 rupees. It starts at 4,000. Okay, because unless you can price at a premium, you don't create the margins to pay the weavers for that, etc. So we brought in banks, we brought in value chain players, etc. And we're trying to see, can we really make this a giant success? The next one I want to talk about, just showing you all the experiments. Diasra is a wonderful foundation in Pune set up by a very successful tech entrepreneur called Anand Deshpande. Anand says, look, in any city like Pune, there are 100 types of businesses that can exist. It's the usual ones, right? And he has created an online template for each of them. So if you're a young woman, you want to open a beauty salon, currently you're working as a beautician, where do I go? Well, you go online, and it walks you step by step, asking questions in 3-4 languages now. It's in Hindi, Marathi, English. And at the end, it gives you a business plan. It can do your company registration. You can apply for a loan online from Bank of Baroda, State Bank of India, etc. Now, in addition to this, they've hired 100 mentors, to actually handhold these people. And you can see already 51,000 businesses have been launched and 33 crores have been dispersed. This is last month's figures. And so we are working with Diasra to take this to all cities. So this is an example of Sunita, who's now got 3 employees and so forth. She's on her way to becoming a mass entrepreneur. Last week we launched, I'm a trustee of Rockefeller Foundation. We just announced a huge joint venture with Tata Power to set up thousands of solar microgrids all across 4 states, UP, Jharkhand, Bihar, and forget it, maybe Uttarakhand. Wherever the grid doesn't go, how do you produce power? And the idea is that power is not just doing lighting, it enables small businesses to start. So what we found is as soon as you have power, 10 types of businesses start up. And those are what? The first one is water purification, cold storage, oil extraction, irrigation pumps. So like this, we found 10 businesses. So we have a partnership to create 200,000 small rural enterprises over the next decade as the grids come up. Wherever the grid comes up, you use a franchising model to come up with these things. So I'm just going to sort of say, look, this is where we are. This is the central question. India is known as a graveyard of interesting ideas and pilots. Little experiments that never scale. Okay? So the question that keeps me awake is, why is this different? How are we going to succeed? Here's what's different. I don't know whether it's good enough, and the question is at the end for you. First of all, we're setting this up as a collaborative arrangement between businesses, tech platforms, government, local government, and those ministries, etc. Because one of the things we've learned from Microsoft is nothing scales unless you're able to build a platform and get all the actors to start working together. Number 2, we're saying our job is to help the whole ecosystem become smarter. That's why what we're doing is find solutions that are already working and dramatically scale it. If the entrepreneurship curriculum is working in 1,000 schools in Delhi, why can't we take it to 30 states? Why can't we take it to affordable private schools? Then we're doing very systematic innovation to find breakthroughs in important areas. Access to credit. Look, I ran Bank of Baroda for 3 years, okay? We had a huge problem meeting our priority sector lending targets. It was very target driven. Every month, DFS used to beat us because we were falling short. The desire to lend was there, but we could never lend to the right people. We were lending to all the wrong people. So it's not credit, but the pathway to credit that is broken. So that's what we're trying to fix, okay? And by the way, the head of this task force is Anjali Dugal, who is a DFS secretary, okay? So I said, ma'am, what you couldn't do as DFS secretary, please help us achieve now. Then, in a number of places, Bangalore, Meghalaya, Punjab, bring all the pieces together and say, can you actually make the breakthrough? And then finally, within years 3, 4, 5, we'll figure out how to replicate this. So the question, as I open it up, is, look, is this enough, or are we missing something? Look, these are all our partnerships. We brought together 80 different organizations under this umbrella called GAME. And there are lots of policy issues. If you ask me what is one of the most important ones, it's make ease of doing business locally for small enterprises as well as service businesses. Number 2, replicate this entrepreneurship curriculum as much amongst youth. This is can we create a social security safety net so that when an entrepreneur tries and fails, they don't die? And how do you get more businesses to offer internships? What we're going to do after some questions is I'm going to request you to break into groups of 6. I'm going to ask you to have one leader in your group. These are the 3 questions. Take any 2 questions, try and answer it, and then come back and we'll have a report out. I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions, comments, clarification. And you can say, look, I don't agree with anything you've said or some of what you said. And you can also give me lots of ideas. Okay? Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Sir, actually, if we see the crime graph, sir, it says that 50 to 60% of the crime which is committed is within the age group of 14 years to 21 years. And which are mainly adolescent boys, and they belong to the lower income group families. So, but now then it is so difficult to target this group for the entrepreneurship, so that when we try to give them the mudra loans or when we try to skill them, So half of the Mudra loans turn into non-performing assets.
Yes.
And also, sir, when we try to skill them, their aspirations are so high, and maybe they are able to procure some easy money from the other sources that they don't sustain in that kind of a skilling activity with that job. So this is the practical situation in the ground. So
Yeah. No, and we are fully experiencing the same practical situation every day. And so the trick is, so for instance in Punjab, what is the issue? No jobs, no future, and so they turn to either migration or drugs or something else. And so what we have to do is create an alternative narrative for them, okay? So there's a very excellent book by Snigdha Poonam called Dreamers. Some of you may have read it. This is the 5th book I've recommended. And she goes around India interviewing youth, particularly young men, and says, look, if we don't have productive outlets for their aspirations, they're going to destroy this country, okay? And that's exactly what's happening. Now, what we are seeing is if we are able to engage them early enough, you can hook them onto these things. The trick is engagement, and much more early, but not just engagement. They must then have a channel to actually start the businesses. Many years ago when I was doing Shiksha, I'd gone to meet Mayawati ma'am in UP because we wanted to launch this computer literacy program in UP. She asked after 10 minutes, "Aap naukri dene wale hain kya?" I said, "No ma'am, we are just skilling them." She says, "Forget it, I have no interest. You'll raise the aspirations and then you know jobs, forget it." So the linkage must be there to then actually starting these businesses. That's why I'm saying these point solutions, ma'am, won't work. Just a mudra loan, just some skilling. There has to be a pathway from engagement to skilling to find, the connection to markets to the finance. That's what we're trying to do. Yes?
Whenever the banks loan, their basic primary emphasis is on the return and safe non-creation of NPA. Especially the current situation when banks are being, prohibited into compliance mode. I think we are working at cross purposes because the person, if you really mean entrepreneurship, it's a risk-taking venture. So Makan Dukan is very easily funded by the bank with a good collateral.
Correct.
But the true entrepreneur is hardly supported. Like I'm taking care of this department in my state, so we spend around 200 crores giving 4% rate of interest loan to various entrepreneurs. Most of the cases which get through are the Makan Dukan types.
Correct.
And entrepreneur ones, they face problem because they don't have a collateral, etc.
Sure.
So I think we have to commit a part of our bank financing to slightly liberal norms for funding.
I agree and disagree. So I agree with the problem statement as is. I think the solution is to bring the branch, a qualified pipeline of good entrepreneurs. Somebody has to do the screening so that you're picking good entrepreneurs and saying, look, these appear to be credit worthy, they have a good performance, they're growing, and they're good credit risk. So in fact, in the women entrepreneurship experiment in Bangalore, in Meghalaya, that's what we're trying to do, bring qualified pipeline to the bank. Number two, if you just give the loan without much facilitation, the chances of it becoming bad are quite high. Okay, so unless again you solve for all these things, you're not going to get there. So part of our experiment is to try and solve this problem. We haven't solved it, but having been on the supply side at BOB, I'm sort of very, very painfully aware of the challenges of this. So, yeah.
And the experience has been that women are zero defaulters. They never default in paying back.
Women are low defaulters. Group lending is usually pretty safe. Franchise models are pretty safe. So there are segments which are actually quite good. That's why I said businesses that start out formal are very important. Why? If he starts out formal, he's paying taxes. He's doing payments using Paytm or some other thing. Now a bank has a transaction record, transaction history. You can use that to do the credit assessment. If it is completely an informal cash-based business, you can never make a good credit decision. That's why starting formal is really important. What else?
Yes. You said that 55% of our people are risk aversion and our entrepreneurship capacity is very less. Is it that whereas certain communities like Chettias of Tamil Nadu or in Gujarat,
pockets are fantastic.
So what is the reason? Is there anything to do with the socio-cultural norms?
Yes, it has a lot to do
with
with
education.
So first of all, right from birth in those communities, this is in the blood. It's in the culture. You look around you, your uncle, father, everybody is doing this kind of business. So you have role models of success. In fact, if you deviate and go for a job, you're seen as a deviant. Okay? So culture plays an incredibly important role. Okay? And that's why everything is local. These things cannot be done top down. It is incredibly multi-local. Yeah. So, sorry, there was a question there, and then I'm going to do the group exercise. Senthil, you have to keep me on time, boss. Okay.
Sir, what we are witnessing today is the emergence of bigger platforms like Amazon or Uber and all that. So, firstly, at the face of it, it appears that the small entrepreneurship may not be able to exist in this era. But then there can be an opportunity also. If we can pack these small entrepreneurs to these bigger platforms,
correct,
they will give them the kind of a forward market linkage which is needed for the success of any small entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. See, all these technologies, whether it's a WhatsApp or a marketplace like Amazon or whatever, is dual use. It can be used for good and or it can be used for exploitation. So right now, if you look at some of these resellers, they are exploitative. And in fact, if we don't regulate them, they will destroy all local businesses. Which is why regulation of these becomes important, so that in fact they become a tide that lifts small businesses, which is what Jio is claiming they're going to do. We'll see. Okay? But this is also one of the biggest opportunities, because for any small business, finding a link to the market, the customer, is one of the most important things. And these offer that. But they have to be sensibly regulated. Okay? Should we break into the groups, Senthil? So look, I really want high quality feedback, because this is not a theoretical exercise. So there are, so 3 questions. We want you to take 10 minutes and answer any 2 questions that your group likes. And then we're going to report back. Huh? I'll distribute that. What's the question? Yeah, but you have to form groups. You can go out of the classroom, have a tea, a chat, or whatever, but please be back in 20 minutes. But your smile is making me nervous.
Mindset and culture of innovation, so that the people are ready to take risks. The students at that age understand how to take risks. They are ready to fail.
Good.
And
I have a question. How many of you are responsible for education in your states, etc.? Higher education. So if you have interest in taking this forward, please approach me and we'll work with you. Okay, next.
Yeah. And then we need to build an ecosystem of entrepreneurship, as you were saying. So we need to identify the avenues of entrepreneurship, like as you were saying, the tea selling would be one thing, the maids, there's a huge gap, and the beauty salon, whatever, and as a state we need to see what are our skill set and what could be the entrepreneurship avenues. And then we need to see in these avenues what are the skill deficit, what is the capital deficit, what is the technology deficit, what is the market deficit.
But where's the policy issue? You're looking at opportunity mapping.
Yeah. So we need to create that ecosystem. For that we need to create such institutes and the regulatory framework, if it's not existence in relation to these factors of capital, market, technology, these things.
Terrific.
And third thing is the single window clearance. When we have identified the avenues of entrepreneurship, we have given them, whatever is required, then they need the clearances, they need to start their business, and for that they need clearances, certificates, licenses. So how, at one point, at one platform, we can give them all the clearances. So we'll try to create that sort of system.
If there is one thing that you can do, it would be to really make it easy to start a small business in the marketplace. Because this delusion that India has become easier to do business is not true at the local level. It's a myth.
Yeah, so...
Those were your 3 points. Those are terrific.
Any other group?
Yes.
Yeah. Apart from what has been said.
Apart from what has been said.
Yeah, please.
So the single window can be a digital platform where you self-certify and fill in your data, and at the end of a 5 minutes or a 10 minutes process, that digital interface itself will give you the clearances. No human interface.
Has any state done that?
Sir, Tamil Nadu has done it, sir. We have a separate portal for this SMEs. And of course, for the large industries, we have guidance bureau. They'll also assist in guiding the large enterprises.
Yeah.
For the small enterprises, we have that.
Fantastic.
And we are also having around some 17.5 lakh SMEs, out of which these MSME, micro enterprises, which will be handling or employing around some 2-3 people, will be around some 16 to 17 lakhs. Roughly that SMEs are small and medium enterprises are around 1 lakh and outside. And one policy intervention which you are thinking is that we try to make, create this entrepreneurial spirit in the minds of the students at the school curriculum itself, sir. So that will generate more often entrepreneurs, more often creators also, and that will help in promoting and creating a new ecosystem for the entrepreneurs, sir.
Perfect.
But we are hearing the single window business since last 20 years. This time. But what is the outcome of that? Still the situation is same.
Sir, Tamil Nadu, I can tell with confidence.
Other than
in Tamil Nadu, sir, actually, we have a global investors meet, and in the global investors meet for the micro industries, MSMEs, we had a commitment of around some 32,000 crores also. And out of that 2,000 crores commitment in the form of an MOUs, and we could able to mobilize as on date more than some 6,000 crores through the single window online portal. But there's no human interventions, and it has been made very simple, and it has been all the stakeholders are finding it very easy also, and this is a path-breaking thing happening in Tamil Nadu.
Okay, I'll promise that we'll study yours, and if it's as robust as you say, we'll share it with everyone.
So other than the points raised by the first group, we'll have a policy for facilitation, whereby the local successful entrepreneurs will be designated as a mentors or a facilitator, and they help the people around them to gain knowledge of entrepreneurship and other related trainings and other things. And third thing will be the credit linkages. So right now our system is very complex and it's very difficult for an ordinary person to get credit. Like what Mr. Jack Ma did in My Bank in China, will try to reduce the number of layers even without going to a physical bank through technology. Will ensure that through their credit scoring and other means, they'll be able to get credit at a faster pace without much mortgaging and other issues also. And we'll try to provide more credit to SHGs and FPOs so that they can have sufficient money to do startup business, because right now whatever money we lend to them, they use it for their consumption purposes. But that is also true that unless they meet their consumption needs, they cannot go for their business needs. So our credit will be in such a way that they'll be able to have sufficient money for their business needs also.
I'll add one more point. Rajasthan, in 3 months ago, enacted an act called MSME Facilitation Act, in which they have enabled all MSME, their small units, to no inspections for next 3 years by all regulatory authorities. And there is a direct registration on the portal and automatic certificate you can download. I think more than 1,500 applications were received within 50 days or 55 days. And it has been appreciated very well. And probably that will reduce the unnecessary inspections and for initial 2-3 years, a small enterprise needs a lot of support, so harassment will be avoided. Possibly this type of legislation may also help.
So in addition to these 2 points, one on the EC permissions, which already spoken, and second about credit. Third point which our group would like to add is regarding the suitable amendments in the labor laws to ensure that small entrepreneurs who are employing 10 or 15 or 20 people are also not harassed by the labor laws, because now we have a very rigid labor law wherein if the number exceeds 10, they will automatically fall in the compliances of so many things. So suitable amendments will be required in the labor law. Perfect. Third point.
But there has to be a balance, I think. And the amendment to labor laws leads to here, sir, on the left side. Amendments to labor law is a dicey thing. It may lead to exploitation sometimes.
So only point is whether it has to be totally abolished or made as simple as possible. That is very
Probably simplification.
Yes, simplification is a solution.
Sir, our other colleagues, they have touched on the regulation and promotional aspects, sir. Our group would like to mention one thing which is quite intangible by nature, which you have also emphasized during your lecture. This idea of making our young generation or youth entrepreneurial or giving them entrepreneurial idea is very glamorous and fashionable to say these things. But we should really understand what does it actually mean when we say making them entrepreneurial and exposing them to these ideas. So our group thought like there are at least two things in this. One is that the mindset. It needs a big mental shift. This mindset of after completing my school and college, I should be getting a job. So you are saying that the age is going away. So it's not like job oriented, looking at a future which is job oriented or job focused. Rather than it should be on owning a business, doing something, creating something by which becoming rich. The idea of becoming rich. In our very, very idealist society, there is a shame associated with creating wealth and being rich. In government also, when we look at businessmen, we always look at them with some kind of suspicion. Oh, ये तो पैसा बनाने आया है. But there should be kind of glory associated with that. Yeah, it's glorious to be rich. So this one idea like shifting from this job-oriented future to business or to this enterprise-oriented future. And the other one is, which is even more intangible, is the idea of this failing and learning from that. You see, there is so much of shame associated with this, like failing. When we ask our kids, okay, ye batao, they always want to hear the right answer. And there is a problem with right answer, because the moment they give right answer or the moment we give a right answer, we shut our mind. When we give wrong answer, then there is a kind of a fluttering going on. There is a frustration, even with the idea of learning. This frustration is an essential part of learning. And that goes into the domain of business also. Like when you fail, you learn a lot. When you fail, you sweat, your mind is hungry, your mind is like sponge, you want to absorb things. So this is again a mental shift. Like our students should learn and imbibe this idea that there is no shame in failing.
Which state are you from?
Sir, I'm from UP.
UP Karan. Help us
No,
bring
sir, I'm in Manipur Karan.
Oh, Manipur Karan. Let's find a way to bring this daily school program modified. All this is there.
Sir.
We now need to, Rajendra ji was talking about the race against time. We can't take 10 years to cover 30 states. We have to do this and get this launched in many, many, many places. Help us.
Sir, I've spoken more than I should have, but what I'm trying to say is like these are the intangibles which are very difficult to in fact understand and
The intangibles are the most important.
One more
Sir, group number 5 was very passionate about two important points, which was mentioned here earlier, but we feel catch them young should not start at the level of the school, at the primary school or something like that. You should go down a little bit more, catch them young, immediately, kindergarten types, where you have some games, fear of failure, leadership skills, these kind of things are very important.
Go younger even, okay.
So one of the recommendations for game is that as well. The second is we should have a focus on having these entrepreneurship activities around agriculture and the productive sector, because what we see here is mainly the service sectors. So they should be having a minimum number of, say X number of entrepreneurship activities will happen in agriculture and the productive sector.
Excellent.
We are running
Give us 5 minutes.
Group 12 may add.
One thing helps. The group is clustering. Like what we've seen is if you have a cluster of let's say dairy units or cluster of any kind of units, this backward linkages come easy. What also helps is ready-made DPRs. You should have ready-made DPRs, but those DPRs should be updated very quickly. Because like I am Ahmedabad or other places, the DPRs are antiquated. So what is latest, what is today in business may be irrelevant after maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
And these very easily simplistic kind of DPRs that can be read in, and they should not be very much expensive and chargeable. They should be available free of cost. They should be available in seminars, in IITs, in ITIs, in 10+2 schools, polytechnics, etc. Because from where you can get your crop. Yeah. Then another is interest subvention can be one good area as compared to direct subsidy. Because interest subvention keeps the person involved. Then another important thing is insurance, some kind of insurance which can be done in poultry sector. Like nobody is ready to give any loan in poultry sector, but there is no insurance. There might be some other areas. Another area is we can have a very simplistic IT return kind of a thing. First 10 years, a very limited reporting, self-certification, etc. We can also have another important issue. Some incubation centers can be created in some software areas. Where you give basic structure by the government and person can come and start his business there. They'll learn from each other. Then another area where it is necessary is we can reward some of the role models at the state level awards, etc. So at least when they talk it out, some people learn from it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Group 12 may add.
Where is Group 12?
Here. If Group 12 may add, children can be encouraged to patent their innovations. That will be one step. I don't want to repeat what others have said. Then with reference to the labour reforms, the wage fixation can be in consultation with the the enterprises, because right now we are doing it from the government, but it gets more flouted than followed. Then there should be a transparent quality norms enforcement for as a policy, so that there is more sustenance and continuous encouragement.
Excellent. Okay, so look, I think we're out of time, but I was warned, you should be prepared for people not being engaged and all that. This is completely the opposite experience. Fantastic, switched on.
So there's only one point which I'd like to add.
So that's a further proof. You're willing to defer lunch.
So we are talking of mass entrepreneurship. What we are seeing on field right now is, with all the schemes put together, I think maximum entrepreneur which each state generates would definitely not be more than 10,000 in each state. What we are talking of is all the credit put together is what is the target, but entrepreneurs generated is very less. So if you're talking of mass entrepreneurship, it requires a huge shift from what we are doing.
Exactly. So my question is this. How many of you want game to be in your states? Is there enough uptake? Reasonably so. Please write to us. My contact is with the Academy. We have our website, www.massentrepreneurship.org. On 12th December in Delhi, we're bringing that whole ecosystem, all the partners for a full day. And so if some of you have interest, let us know. And we'd love to invite you. I've already invited some of you specifically. Anybody in education, anybody in entrepreneurship facilitation, we'd love to have you there. So it's going to be fantastic. Again, thanks a ton and appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent, sir. Thank you so much for your insightful and thoughtful lecture, which is also very inspiring. And you introduced a new concept like small enterprises, mass enterprises. How to create a mass movement of small enterprises. Thank you so much, sir. And on behalf of the Academy and my colleagues, I wish to hand over a small token of memento as a gratitude moment.
इसके बाद 1 to 78 वाला है 1 to 78
Just wait for one announcement.
1 to 1 का होगा 1 to
Just one or two announcements. One is starting tomorrow's full day session on emotional intelligence. So only half of you have filled up that questionnaire.